Finally, we have the financial plan, and I will not go into depth in the financial plan, but I will mention a few things. Here in this plan, you could start with some historical financial statements. So here you show the state of the company in the recent past. What does it look like with regard to turnover? And turnover, that is the annual sales volume, net of all discounts and sales taxes. Right? You look at the assets, and the assets is basically everything of value that you have that can be converted into cash. What assets do you have in your company? And finally, the liabilities. And liabilities is basically the legal financial debt that you have. So the financial model, here you are looking forward. And I'm not going in depth here, but I'm going to mention break even because that is often talked about. You can see here we have the y-axis. Here we have profits, and then we have the x-axis with units sold. And when you start producing, let's say this is some kind of unit, some kind of product or some kind of service, in the beginning you have some fixed costs. It costs money to produce whatever it is, and therefore in the beginning the profit will be negative. You will not have a profit basically. And then you start selling units, and after a while you reach the x-axis and the profit starts becoming positive. And this point when you cross the x-axis is called the break-even point. So break-even in units, and you use units. You don't use dollars or kronor or euro or something like that. It's better to use units. And the slope here, that would be the price of the unit minus the variable cost, I mean the cost for each unit. You have some fixed cost as well, that is always there, but that doesn't change with the units. It's the same no matter how many units you sell. But the variable cost, you deduct that from the price, then you get a slope. If you want to calculate the break-even point in units, then you start by listing the fixed costs, the weekly, monthly or annually fixed costs associated with your providing product or service. What is the sum of all these costs? A fixed cost is something that does not vary. It's the same no matter how many units you produce. It could be like you have rented a factory space, and that has you pay the rent on that, and you do that regardless of how many units you sell, then that will be a fixed cost. Then you list all the variable costs per unit associated with your providing product or service. That is the things that vary depending on how many units you produce. Could be costs for material, for instance. What is the sum of all of these costs? Then to calculate the break-even point in units, you take the fixed costs, the sum of those, and you divide it with the sales price per unit minus the variable cost per unit. Then some questions in relation to this. How large is the market for your product or service, preferably in units, not dollars? So calculate the break-even market share. How large market share do you need in order to reach break-even? Is this market share reasonably attainable? Is it logical that you could take this large part of the market? Is this something that you could kind of argue for? That, well, it's possible for us to sell that many units and to take that large part of the market, or small part of the market if that's your goal. Then we move on to the first part of the business plan that I said that we were going to write last, the executive summary. The executive summary is really important because that might be the only thing that people read from your business plan. Then they want perhaps make some kind of checkpoints into the business plan and see, okay, but this was interesting, I want to read more about it. But they start with the executive summary. Is that rubbish? They will not read the rest. Here you present the most essential information contained in the business plan, and it should follow the structure of the business plan, but it should be short, no longer than 1 page, I would say. Then all the things that you thought were very, very interesting that no one else perhaps think is interesting, that you put in the appendices. Here you provide some necessary things that not all people might be interested in. And the most common and essential appendices are management, resumes of people, product materials, tax returns. When you've done all of this, don't forget the assembly. I mentioned it in the beginning. It's important that this looks good. So the business plan should be placed in the proper order, including a cover page and a table of content. And I would add, it has to have a nice layout so that people think that you actually put a lot of effort into it, because they will see kind of the visual of the business plan first. So they will kind of be judging you already when they see, okay, does it look nice? Then they have actually laid down a lot of effort into the plan, and then perhaps also in their business and in what they're doing. So that was the schoolbook example of business plan writing. Now you will have the small recap in a short video. Slightly different than what I said, but that kind of shows you that, well, a business plan is something that you yourself create. There's not a kind of predictated way that you have to write a business plan. You consider who the audience is, as I said in the beginning. And after you've seen the recap, you go into Patrick Fitzgerald's video, which will give you the best advice, I think. Thank you for listening.